Hello, 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 and welcome again to another episode of Burnout and Beyond. I am thrilled to be here today in this space where we talk about the impact that burnout has on leaders in various industries and the trends that we're seeing. I'm Victor Bartley, your host, and today we are thrilled to have with us Dr. Keenan J. Adams, and we are taking a different spin, a turn today, and so we want to go ahead and welcome Dr. Keenan J. Adams to the space today. Welcome, my man.
Victor, so good to talk with you, my friend.
Hey, man, we thank you so much for being here. Just before we get into this unique dialogue on burnout, and particularly the area of expertise that you work in, tell us a bit about yourself, what you do, and who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Keenan Adams. I'm from Columbia, South Carolina. Victor and I actually grew up together singing on choirs. And
Yeah.
from there, I had to throw that in there. From there,
Yeah,
we were actually, he was an undergrad, and we attended Clemson while I was in graduate school. And I started studying disturbance ecology, which looks at how a disturbance over time is actually a driver in the environment and natural disturbance. A lot of times disturbance is looked at as something negative. And then from there, I realized, wow, I'm looking at things just from an ecological perspective, but there's this human component, this social component to the world. And so for my doctorate, I studied human dimensions, which looked at the interactions of people and nature. And from there, I started working for the federal government, and now I manage a forest in Puerto Rico, and really working to work on community and people and the conservation and the forest and those systems, and how to have harmony between a healthy ecosystem, but as well as also healthy communities. So it's been a passion of mine of thinking about these dynamic systems and how they interact between people and nature. And so when you mentioned this to me, I was like, oh, of course, there's all these connections between burnout and ecology and nature. So would love to talk about it.
man. Now this is awesome, and I've got to give a big shout out to you, as I shout you out often in different presentations that I do. But you were really a foundational catalyst in really the angle that I take with burnout, the whole biomimicry focus, and that definitely is what you do, man. And so I said, man, we've got to have Dr. Adams Keenan on to talk with us about this thing, man. And so, just for starters, if I know everybody doesn't have the ecological background that you do, if you would just break down for us the connection, the human to nature connection that we share.
Yeah, sure. So, because of how religion may have been presented as an early age, it always presented humans away from the environment. Man having dominion over the environment, and that created a mindset of, oh, we're not with nature, we're outside of nature, when in fact we are mammals. We have the very similar characteristics, or function in many different ways, and we are definitely influenced by nature, and nature is definitely influenced by us. We've been on this earth a fraction of the time that the earth has been existed, but we've had a huge impact. Think of in terms of urbanization, or us damming a river, and think about that impact we have, right? And so there's this very strong link between how the environment is performing and how we're performing. Think about it in terms of wildfires. We suppressed fire. We thought fire was bad. We stopped it from occurring. We would put it out, but that was actually natural. And now these fires are much worse, right? And so, but also these wildfires are affecting us, right? All the smoke is impacting. It can shut down a flight, which then shuts down our commerce. COVID, for example, whether if it say whether it did or did not come from a wet market, it could have come from a wet market, right? And that interaction with nature of a bad or that episodic event where that virus transferred from one organism to another than to us. Think about that level of disruption, right? And so we're all interconnected, whether we want to look at it for not our food, our food supply, droughts. Think about the Dust Bowl. We are inextricably linked with nature. And that's why you look at all these historical stories, these oral narratives, and people are always concerned about drought. That's why people prayed for rain. You know, a lot of times just throughout different cultures, a lot of people's deities were of nature because they intuitively knew that there was a heavy reliance on nature between our well-being and what's occurring with us on the outside. So yeah, it's easy to think, oh, I farm this land, I'm separated from it, or no, we're really dependent on each other. And in conservation, we're called a keystone species. So think about an arch, right? And the last one is a keystone. If you pull it, the whole arch falls. And we help drive a lot of change, right? And so if you pull us out the system, some systems may fall. So yeah, we're big disturbers. We're big ecosystem drivers. The Native Americans changed the landscape. A lot of us think of the United States and say, oh, this was a virgin forest. No, Native Americans were very active in creating disturbance and change in the environment, and it really shaped it the way it was.
Okay. Wow. No, that's that framework is extremely powerful and provocative. Just the unity and connection that we share with nature, and the various other ways that we have been taught to see it. Particularly as we talk about burnout, that is extremely helpful. That is an extremely helpful perspective. So, what are ways that we see of sorts this disturbance impacting? You shared about a couple of experiences, the wildfire, and how we've had I guess a hate relationship with it, but the benefit that it actually has to the environment. Are there other scenarios in nature where disturbances actually offer some benefit?
Yeah, so hurricanes.
Okay.
Puerto Rico hits home, right? We had Hurricane Maria. Hurricanes are a driver of the ecosystem. So think about a forest growth. You don't want the forest to be the same height. You want diversity, right, in the forest structure. And the way you get that level of diversity, of biodiversity, is through disturbance. And so when a hurricane comes, it may knock down a patch of trees, but that patch of trees gives, now the canopy is gone, the light's shining on the ground, and you have, younger species or different types of species that are now going to grow. So that's like one level of disturbance. Flooding is another disturbance, where you may have a lot of sediment in the rivers, and a big rain can flush it out. So that, the ones that really, to most folks that are watching this, are fire, flood. Think about those big events, wind events, ice storms. All these things are just, drought is a huge disturbance. But what it does is it creates resiliency in the system, and that over time, the species will adapt and evolve to deal with these disturbances, right? And so the way it's simple to link this to burnout, because think about your life. You're full of disturbances, right? And a lot of times we look at them negatively. It's how you frame it. And just even reframing it, this is a disturbance. It just is. It's not neither positive nor negative. Think about the level of growth that occurs in you when you're uncomfortable, when you have faced a new challenge, when you're presented with something new. It's always, to me, the growth is within the area of discomfort. If you're panicking, then you're not growing, right? Your amygdala is firing and you're fighting and flighting. But when you're in that part where you're still able to keep the part of your brain where you're able to process what's going on and use your logic, you can start self-reflecting. You can start thinking about what's going on with you. And so those disturbances are good. And then the different types of disturbances you may face makes you more resilient. you now have tools in your toolbox to cope with those disturbances, right? And so our bodies are just our bodies. We have so many different systems within our bodies that interact with each other. It's no different than nature. And think about immunity and COVID, and that's a disturbance, right? And your body then adapts and develops antibodies, and over time you develop a stronger immune system. So yeah, these linkages are just integral, or just inherent.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. Yeah, you mentioned something that I think is really foundational to burnout recovery, and that's looking at the disturbance in a different way, right? Reframing what it is, and not seeing it as positive or negative, but just seeing it as just that, and kind of walking through that and looking at it in the face, rather than quickly assigning a polarity, so to speak, to it. Um, how does and you talked a bit about how nature does it just automatically, in your field, or just in what you've seen and lessons taken from nature. How can we better do that type of work that nature does just inherently, right? We kind of have, I see, of sorts of choice, and the way we've been taught to think, the way that we've been processing things, may not lend to what nature does naturally. What are some things that we can take from nature in order to better do what nature does?
So when nature is disturbed, is a process called succession. This is early succession, mid succession, late succession. So let's use the forest for example.
Okay.
When a tree, say a patch of trees, fall down from an ice storm or get knocked out, and those were the oak trees. And think about oaks as a wine glass. The root systems are more shallow, but there's ways it's more stable, right?
Okay.
But what happens initially is a bunch of shrubs will come up just to cover the ground to help prevent like erosion, to help stabilize that system. And then pine trees will come first. And those pine trees, think about it like a stick going down. Their roots have a very strong taproot, right? But they fall over easy because they're not as stable. So think about in terms of that succession, just first mitigation. The second is to start getting some type of movement. And the last tree that would come in is the oak that would then have much more stable roots that won't fall over as easy. And those oaks can grow in shade, right? So those pine trees, they like a lot of sun. So let's think about in terms of mimicry. I would say that first part is just stabilizing yourself. So say you get hit with the disturbances, stabilize the situation, try to understand what's occurring, but do something to immediately get out of it. Don't stay there. A lot of these things happen, and sometimes you talk to people and they're talking something that happened 15 years ago, and I ask them, why do you want to stay there? Why do you want to, it just seems like you want to stay in that year or whatever, 2020 or 20, you're staying there. No, start doing something, start stabilizing the situation. The next part is that moving forward, right? Just progressing and saying, okay, it's time to start moving forward. And then that last part is really settling, getting your stability back. So that's one way to mimic. And then another, to not geek out too much, is a thing called communalism.
Okay.
Where we were learning that other trees may start transferring nutrients to different species of other trees. We're just now understanding all this nutrient transfer, right?
Wow.
And so these trees are working in community. And so I would say for us to mimic that is to have a community to lean on, because you never know when you're going to need nutrients from somebody else or when you may need to give nutrients to other people, right? And then just this continuous theme of trees, the trees, many of the hardwood trees that lose their leaves, before they do that, it's called translocation. They translocate all their nutrients down to their roots, right? They're recharging, and every year. And I still remember I took this leadership training that was a year long, and we had months of class time.
Hmm.
And the teacher said, when was the last time as an adult you had time to focus on yourself? Just you. Nothing else, no work, just focus on yourself. And I think about that as translocation. Like every year, being intentional on getting centered, like taking time, get rid of the stuff that you have to deal with, and really focus on your roots, focus on your stability. Um, I think there's just a lot to learn. Nature does it on a cyclic basis.
Hmm.
And we typically only try to, people start getting counseling when they have a crisis
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah,
versus that
instead of doing
routine
it on
maintenance.
cycle. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
No,
there's
that's
just a lot to learn.
wow. Here's a simple lesson from this episode. Spend some time in nature and allow ourselves to be taught. Wow, that's man, you hit on so many different things, man, that I really love. Just that nutrient transfer idea, man. That's super cool. That's extremely cool. I also like what you spoke about, just that whole recharging only happens when all of the nutrients of sorts like sinks to the root. And sometimes as humans we can be overly concerned about what branches and fruit and things like that are noticeable, that if it's not happening in a noticeable way, then we're saying like we aren't doing anything. But what you're saying is that the systems of nature sustain itself by just taking that cycle of just recharging and only focusing on just kind of really being centered and stabilized. Man, so many lessons you know that are intuitive, as you said. They're inherent. This just makes sense, right? But there's just the resistance that we live with that nature doesn't.
Hmm.
That we have to definitely learn to undo that resistance um, that we battle. And just kind of thinking I said resistance, but you also talked about another R word that I want to come to in just a moment. But as far as just that difference, I guess if we could use that term, nature, as you mentioned, just does this on cycle, and we only want to do it in crisis mode. What are some tips for those that are listening to this podcast that are that person that only wants to do this type of work when it's crisis instead of doing it in cycle? What tip or what encouragement could you give to them about taking their lead from nature?
Okay, yeah. So most cycles are triggered by in nature something. So there's a thing called Zugenru with birds, and this I think it was a German wildlife biologist. And initially we thought that birds were migrating on different cues because, like, how does a bird know when to migrate?
Mm, yeah, yeah.
And then we noticed that we put birds in cages without those cues that we thought, and they were getting restless. And they call it Zugenru syndrome when a bird starts getting really restless, and then it goes migrate, and then it goes to migrate. And so one thing is to listen to your intuition, but the other thing is have those, and some migration and elements of migration is triggered by the amount of time daylight in a certain area or certain
Gotcha.
temperatures.
Okay.
Have your environmental triggers. Be self-aware of yourself and saying, hey, well, I've noticed when I've burned out, these really, as soon as you burn out, say, what was my body telling me beforehand? I get knots in my back. I may start getting a little anxiety I may lose sleep. Okay, your body is telling you something. Take a hard stop. And the other is to have those environmental cues of maybe it's a calendar reminder, maybe it's every October you take this week off,
Mhm.
but set in those hard reminders, plan for it. If you don't I forgot the name of it, but that expression. But essentially, if you're not planning, you're planning to fail, right? And so it's really being selfish with your time and planning, listening to those, make your own environmental cues and listen to your body. Be super hyper focused on yourself, and those your body will speak to you time and time again.
Man, like our grandparents would say, like, oh, I know when it's about to rain. My knees are telling me. Like we've been hearing this, we've been hearing this stuff like all of our lives, and we thought it was crazy. But no, man, that's extremely powerful because one of the things that can happen and is celebrated, particularly in the sports world, is people's ability to use their mind in spite of to like essentially do what their mind is saying despite how their body feels.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so like a player is fatigued, they have an ankle. I think I was watching a documentary about how Isaiah Thomas scored like 25 or something points after he rolled his ankle, sprained ankle, and he was hobbling the whole game. Like just insane stuff, like insane feats that were accomplished. I think they lost the series. I can't recall, but just that game they actually won on this guy basically playing on one leg, right? And so we kind of take that mentality and apply it to our lives. Well, I can just keep going, right? Like I just tell myself to just keep going. And you're saying like, no, we have to do the opposite. Like actually listen to what your body is saying and allow that to be what you go off of and to regulate what you're thinking based on what your body is already saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. That's
I
huge.
think there's moments when you need to grind through, right? You lose your job and you have to feed the kids. That's the time to do it. But I always tell people, you're not Isaiah Thomas. You're not Michael Jordan.
Absolutely.
He's the best of the best of the best. Just to get to acceptance that I'm not the best of the best of the best of the best of the best, and I have limitations, and I need to listen to my body. Yeah, and the other thing I would add is being agnostic. We get in our heads so much. A lot of this is self-driven in our heads, and understanding what to be agnostic about. At the top of that reframing, nature is agnostic to a lot of. It doesn't care. It doesn't assign any meaning. We have this need as a human species to put things in order and put meaning to it, and sometimes things happen because there's no meaning behind it at all. It just happened. Why did it lightning? It doesn't matter why it lightning. All you need to know that it did lightning, right? It just struck lightning. So knowing and understanding that everything doesn't have to have some high order crazy meaning or interconnection to it. It's okay to be agnostic about some disturbance happening. It's nobody. I think we get it from Santa Claus. As kids are telling, oh, well, if you do this, then Santa Claus is going to be like. It doesn't work like that. And maybe you believe that in cool. And there's a lot of different belief systems, but just
right.
Regardless of your beliefs, say, okay, I think these things have meaning, but be very intentional. What am I agnostic about in terms of meaning? Because then that'll remove a lot of the self-imposed anxiety or getting in your head.
Wow.
Be learn from nature and what to be agnostic about. And nature is very intuitive to what cues are very important to that species or to that community of organisms, and what's it agnostic to as well. Yeah.
No, that's extremely powerful, man, because you're absolutely right. There is pressure that we can put on ourselves trying to find meaning behind what happened to us when we just need to really just accept that it happened and say, okay, it's time to work. Like it's time to move from this spot. It's I can't get stuck here. And as you're saying, man, that could be a reason why some get stuck because they're so busy trying to find the meaning as to why it even happened. Instead of saying, okay, what is it that I can learn from this? And instead of kind of moving into that falling forward, so to speak, position, and instead of just kind of saying, and obviously it's a art more than it is a science because there's a mixture that's needed sometimes, right? Sometimes you do need to sit with it, right? And as you just said,
Hmm.
you need to determine what you're going to be agnostic about, to use the terminology that you use. You also mentioned, as you were sharing some, um, earlier, about the resilience that nature, builds along the way as these disturbances, um, occur. Like, this is something. If you share a little bit more, is this something that nature just does, or is it just how does that whole process work with disturbance and resilience development
Hmm.
in nature?
So for example, there's a pine tree that it drops its cone, but the
Okay.
cone does not release the seed until there's a fire, right? And then that seed then sprouts after there's a fire. Well, that makes sure that that tree persists on that landscape over a long period of time.
Mm,
Um, and I think about in terms of your life is is our good friend Steve Stack could talk about your emergency fund.
yeah.
Having these
Yeah.
different emergency funds that you can rely on when you're wiped out, you got something there. That could be
Wow.
through your relationships with people. That could be through financial resources. That whatever that is. Um, and also the resiliency. I'm trying to think of another. We're talking about forest a lot. Oh, it's having different species in a forest makes it healthy. So, say a disease affects pine trees or a certain type of pine, those trees may die out, but the forest as a whole, because it has many different species of trees, is able to survive that disease that may come. And that's about diversity. Biodiversity is one of our best, or nature's best fight for resiliency. And then evolution over time, changing and adapting to conditions. So you can go to Galapagos and see turtles with different length necks, or you'll see different species with different color patterns, depending on the type of environment they're in. So it might be the same species, but it has a different, maybe a green in this situation, maybe brown in that situation, so it can hide better. So that's also the adaptation to the environment. And so, if you're staying static as a person and not evolving to these disturbances, is putting those tools in your toolbox. That's really important. It's um, understanding that there's windows of opportunity for growth and being able to capitalize on those windows of opportunity. And then also having diversity of experiences. Put yourself in uncomfortable positions. Talk with people. Find if you have a mentor that's just like you, what are they going to give you? Like have people and associate with people that are very different from you, because you're going to learn something. And yeah, it's just a lot. Having diversity in life of experiences and expectations, and it helps to make you more well-rounded to deal with whatever you're going to be facing.
Man, that's again just so simple, yet at the same time very, you know, organic, inherent, and just intuitive. Um, sometimes we can learn so much that we can just kind of miss the simple things that 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 you're just discussing, man. And it's so powerful. As you were saying that, just from the previous point of resistance, like dealing with our need to resist sometimes, and also just the points that you leveled about resilience. There's this picture that keeps coming to mind of just rhythms and rest. Like
Hmm.
there's just kind of this art of living. Like we see it in nature. Like you mentioned before, choirs, and so music is something that is in me, right? And so like music doesn't work if it's just rhythm. Like there's points of rest. Like it stops.
Hmm.
There are pauses in the songs. There's climaxes. It speeds up, it slows down, it's forte. It's just those various things in music that happen. It's not the same all the time, right? And so, as you mentioned before, the necessity to adapt. Sometimes that can be our biggest challenge is adapting. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
want to be this way. This is how I've seen it, or this is what I was taught in this season, or I don't want to have to go through, an evolution. But as you mentioned, just the reality that nature remains stable because it's a safe space to change, right? And that's just really a probing question for, I think, all of us to do our own self-reflection. Is my life, is the environment that I'm creating safe for change, for necessary,
Mm-hmm.
to be the most resilient and form of ecology, so to speak, a form of life that will not just benefit me but also my environment around me. Um, that's absolutely, man. Um, you've done, and I mean, you've done this. I know for years, and for many that have heard you before, but you've created a thirst for why we need to be out in nature more. If you're not someone that doesn't like to be out in nature, things of that nature, this conversation, I believe, is triggered for somebody who's like, man, I've got to go out and just sit out and go take a hike, go sit by some water, just do something in nature, just to connect, to remind myself of the connection that is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you just really brought that out to us, man, and it's been a joy to have you on, man. There's so many more questions that I have, and I'm just going to end it here today. We'll have to have you to come back
Episode
on.
two.
Yeah, part two. We'll have to do a part two for sure. Man, where can we find you to learn more about what you do, and follow you in some of the endeavors that you have going on?
Just my LinkedIn account. You can, whenever you post it, as Keenan Adams. Look for the person that works in Puerto Rico named Keenan Adams. There's only one person named Keenan here. So
Okay.
uh, and yeah, I'll talk a lot about community and nature. More at the community level. But yeah, just check my work, our work out there. Let's say my work. It's our work. We have an amazing team, amazing partners. It's really the intersection of helping out brown disenfranchised communities and managing nature, and it's just a life passion of mine. I'm sure you see my LinkedIn. I'm very passionate about just the stuff we're doing and helping people.
Yeah.
There's this false analogy that we can't balance commerce and people's well-being and nature. We can. And as Victor's encouraged, just get out in nature, go for a hike, go for a walk, whatever is comfortable for you, and just start observing things and questioning things, and you'll enjoy it. Hopefully you'll find some peace and tranquility in it.
Absolutely, man. It's been a joy to have you. I want to thank you again, Keenan, for joining us. It's, man, you shared so many gems with us today.
Thank you, man. It's good to talk with you, my friend.
Absolutely. And we want to thank each of you for joining this episode of Burnout and Beyond. And always remember that burnout is an invitation to begin again. Peace out.